All right, so this was a really fun hand against Ivan Luca, who was the chip leader in the tournament with a couple tables to go. I was second in chips, and I was on his left. And, in that kind of situation, you want to be a little bit of a pest. You should probably be 3-betting more, especially because Ivan Luca specifically was opening extremely wide. I mean, the round previous under the gun, we saw, he was raising Jack-3 offsuit under the gun. So in this hand, what you're going to see is he's opening from, middle to late position here. And in this situation, we're going to give him a really wide range. Based on what we've seen, he's raising like Jack-3 offsuit. We're going to look at, I'm thinking he's opening upwards of like 65% of the hands in this situation, right? So now you think to yourself, I've got 2 deuces behind. Like, if you know somebody's opening 65% of hands, or you think that that's roughly the range where they're capable of opening, you should be 3-betting a lot. And so in this case, with the 2 deuces, I elect to just flat, but I think you should, overall, in theory, be 3-betting a lot more. I decided to take a flop with him with the deuces, and this one's probably on the slightly on the spewy side. It's it's just not that great a hand, especially because you're probably going to get the big blind in. Hand plays 3-way, you can get squeezed. So in hindsight, I think a fold here is safer. I felt frisky. I wanted to see some flops, so I decided I was going to play one with Ivan Luca in position.
So action here is going to be on Seth Davies. He's under the gun. Looks like he's folded, which means it's on Ivan Luca. The chip leader raises. Action now on Dinex, who seems to have a decision. He decides to call. Round to carry cats. He's out. Stephen Chidwick folds the button. So Luca's raised it with 9s. As we see, Kenny and Canet fold the blinds. What has Daniel called with?
So now when I call, Ivan has to think to himself, like, what does my range look like? Okay, so my range looks like, could I have aces, kings? Sure, maybe, possibly. Probably going to 3-bet him with those. I could have some queens. Basically, obviously, since I called with deuces, all pairs, all suited aces, a lot of Broadway suited hands, some suited connectors as well. Again, I'm going to use a mixed strategy with a lot of these. I'm not always going to just call with 8-9 suited or 9-10 suited. Sometimes I'll re-raise, sometimes I'll flat. But overall, we're not, as I said, we're not going to get too far into like weighting ranges. We're just going to look at entirety of what I could have here. So this is a look here at, roughly what kind of range I might flat with in this kind of position.
It's going to be a pretty bad hand, I think. Oh no, he's actually early position. That's my bad. I'm sorry.
So Luca has an overpair to the board. It's a low flop. Daniel with deuces.
Pretty good board for deuces. He gets the 4 for a straight. Always adds a big percentage. Can't underestimate the gut shot.
So Luca continues for 28,000. Daniel calls. No, that's a raise. I've realized the chip denominations, of course, in the Super High Roller are different. So that is a raise to 95,000.
I love the way Daniel's playing. I've said it in the past few hands before. You can just tell that he's really caught up to the current meta game, just like raising a lot, like playing all your semi-bad hands very aggressively.
So now the flop comes, pretty good for me, actually. I've got a gut shot, and I've actually got a pair. But it's not a flop that I can just discount Ivan Luca hitting as well. If you're going to consider the guy's opening, 65% of the hands, he could flop straights with 4-7. He could have a lot of combinations of hands that actually hit that flop. But when he bets this flop, does that change at all the range of hands that you put him on pre-flop? I want to say the answer is, for the most part, no. Obviously, you can make a case for maybe him slow playing some of the better hands like aces or kings, or, even pocket sixes or things like that. But let's just assume that, Ivan is he's smart enough, and we know that he is, to bet some part of his, he's going to bet every part of that range some of the time, okay? So when he bets, that doesn't really tell me much. It doesn't really say anything more than, okay, he still has one of these hands, which is like a wide variety of them, right? So I feel like the deuces actually, against that range that he could have, is the best hand right now. So I go ahead and I raise this flop. Now, when Ivan Luca sees the raise, he's asking, now what he can do is he can sort of separate, like, okay, what value hands is Daniel raising me with? What could he have that's value? And then what hands are bluffs? Okay, so, or what hands are even semi-bluffs? We'll go through all three. So the value hands I could have are obviously pocket sixes, pocket fives, or sorry, pocket sixes, pocket fives, pocket threes, right? Any set. Also 5-6 suited is another hand that I'm going to flat with there some of the time. Also, you know, you could make a case for occasionally, obviously I did have deuces, me having like sevens, eights, all the way through queens possibly. I probably don't raise aces or kings all that often. I'm probably going to continue to slow play a hand like that. But you could make a case for me raising with basically all pairs, deuces through queens. You know, that's one possibility, as well as 6-5 suited. There's also some other hands that I could raise with there. Pocket fours, as I said, it counts in there, but like ace-4 suited, you know, ace-5 suited, ace-6 suited. There's a few hands in there that I could potentially raise, especially if I have a backdoor flush draw. Also, you know, those are the value hands we talked about. There's some semi-bluff hands like 4-5 suited and the pocket fours is, again, because it could be the best hand, but it's also, you know, a strong enough draw with pocket fours. You assume, you know, you have a deuce and a 7 and maybe a 4 to, you know, as outs against the big overpair if he were to happen to have one. So I go ahead and raise. Now let's look at the bluffs that I could have. Well, you know, queen jack suited, queen 10 suited, 9-10 suited. Would I ever bluff in that spot? Sure, some of the time. I'm going to go ahead and bluff, especially against the guy who's opening so wide. Could have a wide variety of hands. I got to have some bluffs in my range. You can't simply be so straightforward like we talked about in the first video about familiarizing yourself with ranges, where when you bet, you got aces, kings, or queens. When you check, you got ace, king. You can't be so easily read. So it's important if you are going to have a raising range on a flop like that is value oriented. You also have to have some semi bluffs. Well, you don't have to have some. Yeah, probably should. They all count. We'll all count it all in the bluffs. So value bluffs, value bets versus semi bluffs and pure bluffs. So now when he calls, I have to make a huge adjustment on what range he could have, right? So now we can essentially, I think for the most part, eliminate like king 9 offsuit, king 10 offsuit. I think he folds, you know, jack 9 offsuit. I don't think he's going to continue for the raiser. He out of position. He may, but it's very unlikely. I don't think that he's going to try to flat and then make a big play at it. So when he calls, I figure he's either connected with the board in some way with a one pair type hand, could be slow playing, or also has a good amount of over pairs as well, right? 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, all the way up to aces.
It's also really impressive because it's a complete opposite of how he always used to play. It's like he had to relearn everything. He was known for small ball, and look at him. He's check raising under pairs with gutters.
Yeah, and having raised the flop, Luca now checks the turn. Is Daniel going to continue firing here? Nope, he checks behind.
Well, the turn card pairs the board. He checks, and I don't think it's a great card for me to barrel. So I was going to barrel a lot of, well, obviously if I hit, I was going to barrel. But I would also have probably barreled a 7 on the turn or something along those lines. But that didn't feel like a good card for me to barrel, so I check back. Now the question is, when I check back, does that really change the range of hands, the value hand? Does that change the range of value hands that you put me on the flop all that much? I would say the answer should be probably not that much, because if I did have a full house here, I am capable of slow playing. I may have raised the flop with jacks or queens and then, you know, check it back on the turn. And of course, if I have some, you know, the bluffs as well, they're all still, I mean, if I bluff raise the flop and check back the turn, I can still have everything that I had before. Nothing really changes with my check back on that card on the river.
The river is an 8, so Luca's good here with 9s. And remember, these are the two biggest stacks at the table engaged in this pot, which is already 284,000. That's more than Mustafa Kanat has.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Check.
Luca checks.
I think we're going to see a check from Negreanu. I think that Luca is not really going to be in the check folding game too much when he calls raise on that board. It's not like he's just, with ace-jack going to think, oh, hey, let's call here and see what happens.
Now the 8 hits the river, and I feel like that's actually quite a good hand for me in my range. When he checks over to me, I also just got a sense that he wasn't extremely strong here, like he wasn't setting me up for a trap. The 8 is actually a good card for me in a lot of ways, because now, especially considering what I'm about to do, the 8 allows me to credibly rep pocket 8s now possibly, as well as 7-9 suited. 7-9 suited, as I said, I'm going to be a lot more liberal in my range against the player who's opening this wide. 7-9 suited may be one of the hands that I go ahead and raise the flop with to hopefully get a check turn and then maybe get a big value bet on the river. The other hands are pocket 6s, all the full houses and all the value hands that made a full house. These are situations where if I did put my opponent on an overpair, I want to get paid, and maybe I want to get paid big. So I felt like if he does have an overpair, nominal bet is going to get called far too often, right? So he's going to be calling half pot. He's going to be calling a third of pot. And I decided, again, exploitatively, based on my history with Ivan Luca, that if I make a big over bet in this situation, he's going to give me credit for a monster, and he's going to give me credit for he's going to eliminate that I have enough bluffs in my range here to actually make this a credible call. And as you see on this river, he doesn't take much time.
If Daniel's going to bet here, he's going to have to put in a massive bet, like massive. There you go.
That is massive.
That is really massive.
And it's a quick fold from Ivan Luca.
Wow, what a bluff.
Daniel's big bluff gets through. It was 400K he bet into 284K, and he takes it down. And I think Daniel Negreanu may have just taken the chip lead from Ivan Luca.
So he wasn't really going through the motions of like, what could Daniel have here, and all these things. So he was pretty convinced that the line that I took, flat pre, raise flop, check back turn, bomb river, was far more likely to be value-oriented than bluff-oriented. So now this play is not always going to work against every player. So it required me understanding a little bit of Ivan's impression of me and what I could do exploitatively. Having said that, it's not terrible anyway, right? Because it's very difficult to play against the player who's going to, make bet sizes like that. And that's probably one of the things that I've incorporated more in the last year, which is altering my bet sizes. Obviously, during the small ball era, the sizes were relatively small, but pretty static and pretty, consistent. Like my value and bluffs were 2/3 pot. Now they could be a wide range. And sometimes, the value is going to be 2x pot, 1.5 pot. It's important though, when you are overbetting, you don't want to fall into a trap of like everyone knowing that like, okay, well, he overbets because he knows you're going to call a smaller bet. So that means he's weaker. And it's very difficult to construct ranges in such a way where you're balanced in these situations. So especially in tournaments, I would say you don't have to be completely balanced. What you should start factoring in addition to, the balance idea is some exploitative play into your opponent's tendencies. Do they call too often? Do they not call enough? Do they think you bluff too much? Do they think you don't bluff enough? So having that extra insight will be a good way in which you can somewhat randomize effectively and intelligently and deviate from sort of like a game theory optimal approach. Whatever the correct bet sizing is there, you can deviate from it based on what you pick up from your opponents. And that's why I'm a firm believer, especially for tournament poker. I'm not talking about online high stakes cash. For tournament poker, if you want to be really good at it, a solid fundamental understanding of some game theory ideas, some understanding of what your range can look like in a situation, how many combinations of value versus bluffs you can have. But ultimately, to be really effective in tournaments, if you want to be the best of those players, you're going to have to deviate from those situations in such a way where you take a bigger advantage against the player. For example, some of these high rollers we play in are not always geniuses. Sometimes there's some weaker players. So the question is, against one of these weaker players, do you simply just take the GTO, the game theory optimal line that the computer spits out at you, or do you deviate massively, knowing that say for example, GTO here is to bet pot against this player, but this player has a really strong hand and they're calling 3 times pot. Well, guess what? You should bet 3 times pot. It doesn't matter that everyone else at the table may know, oh, he's not balanced here. He's betting 3 times spot. Doesn't matter. I'm not up against you. I'm up against this specific player. So to be a really well-defined all-around poker player, I think especially in the 2018 era, it requires a good understanding of ranges and game theory, but ultimately the creme de la creme is going to have that special advantage of understanding when to deviate and exploit their opponents. So hope this videos and hope these last few have been valuable to you guys. I hope to continue to do this kind of thing throughout the World Series of Poker, where we expect to do really, really well. I'll be studying up myself on what my opponent's tendencies are, and you should be too. So till next time, see you guys.